and that's what that means is because under the Local Government Act 1972, that prevents councils from making formal decisions remotely, but I'm sure it will be actually a very, very useful meeting. And if there were to be any formal resolutions or recommendations to the executive, they can be rolled forward to our next meeting on the 21st of September. So if we can start with introductions, I think most of us know each other. We've got one or two new people. So if I can just sort of work my way across the screen from top to bottom and left to right. So if I can start with you, Ellie.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie. I'm the Democratic Services Officer Clerk in this meeting.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Gallagher, Councillor for Shortstown Ward.
Thank you. Paul?
I'm Paul Edmonds. I'm Councillor for Carson Union Ward.
Great. Catherine?
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine Essink. I'm the CEO of Bolt.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Evening, everybody. Jonathan Churchill, Service Director for Children's Social Care.
And Alison?
Hi, Alison Fuller. I'm the Head of Service for Inclusion at Bedford Borough.
Welcome to the meeting, Alison. And Max?
Hello there, Councillor Max Voyden for Putney Ward.
Lucy?
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Munt. I'm the Commissioning Lead for Children's Placement.
Hi. And Dan? I know you're there somewhere. Well, we'll come back to Dan. I know he's with us. Chris?
Yeah, hello everyone. Chris Morris. I'm the Service Director for Education, Send and School Infrastructure at Bedford Borough Council.
And Vanessa?
Hi everyone, my name's Vanessa Miller. I'm the Head Teacher at Grays Education Centre.
Welcome, Vanessa. And Hilda?
Hi, I'm Hilda Hendricks, Councillor for Riverfield Ward.
Great stuff. Well, thanks, folks. So if we could start with any questions from members of the council present. Nope. Sorry, Carl.
Yes, sorry, no, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed you.
No, that's fine.
Terrible.
Councillor Carl Meader, representing Bedford Borough Council, Kempston South. Can I just say to you, can you hear me okay? The noise this end is not very, the sound this end is not very good. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, it's very muffled this end. Okay, well, I'll see how it goes.
See if you can turn your sound up.
Yeah, okay. I'll try.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, so apologies. So we've got apologies from Harmesh, Philippa, and Duncan. So anybody else? Ellie? I think that's it, isn't it?
No, no one else from my end yet.
Great, thank you. So minutes. So if we can confirm the minutes of the meeting held on June the 8th. So do the members present, can they confirm that they are accurate minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So just following on from the minutes, I'll be putting a formal recommendation about Yaleswood, the impact on children's services, the recent impact to the executive on this Wednesday. So Hilda, question.
Yeah, I just wanted to check whether the meeting that was requested by Sam Price, the Chief Executive Beyond Detention, whether those are in the diary, whether those have happened. I don't know whether anyone can answer that question.
That would have been Jonathan, possibly.
I know that at the end of the meeting there was an in-depth conversation between the person from the organisation and Mel, and diaries were out. So I'm assuming that now has happened and people are in touch with each other, and that's taken place.
Yeah, it would just be great to check, because I think 2 weeks after our meeting, Sam sent a message saying that she still hadn't had a meeting. So,
Really? Okay,
yeah,
that
yeah.
surprises me. All right, I will check with Mel, and I will.
Yeah.
Ellie, if I let you know, and you can let everyone know. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Dan, you've popped up again. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. I'm Dan Jones. I'm the head of QA, and my speakers don't seem to want to play. So I'm on my phone currently while I sort it out.
Okay, well done. Okay, so
sorry, I was just confirming that I had an email from Sam saying that they had a meeting. That was the Tuesday, third week of June, I think, second week of June.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. So the meeting's taken place.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
Well,
So
a meeting.
Okay, excellent. So if we can go on to disclose any local or pecuniary interests, if anybody's got a local interest to declare. I'm a governor at Kempston Academy, which I think is probably worth declaring. So anybody else? Carl, I think are you a school governor?
Yeah, sorry, the sound is still poor this end. I think I'm going to drop out and reboot. Yeah, sorry, I just caught that last bit. Yeah, I am. I'm a school governor at Dorby Academy. So yeah, thank you. Yeah,
great stuff.
I'm just Chair. I'm just going to drop out and try and get back in again. Okay, so it's any
no
better.
problem at all. No
Okay,
problem. Okay, so if we can go on to the Children's Services Improvement Plan. So that's over to you, Jonathan and Dan, I guess.
Thank you. Shall I share the report on the screen? Would that be helpful for people?
Yeah, if you can do that'd be great.
Yep, cool. Oh, hang on. I'll stop sharing that, and I'll share the thing I want to share. Right, there we go. Right, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. If you could try to make it full screen, then I think we should be able to see it a bit better. That's certainly better. Yeah. That's
okay.
Much
all right.
Better.
Shout if it's stuck. Yeah, as it says, the new structure went live on the 15th of June, and prior to that, we had some teams and managers in place already. Because of various reasons, we were able to get them started earlier. So that's principally the 4 family support teams. So they've been live for since sort of the beginning of May, I think, that sort of time. But everyone else has gone live 15th of June, and so there's been a raft of interviews to fill. Primarily it is the management positions, so service managers and head of service, the ones that were vacant. So there's interviewing taking place and people being appointed. The reports from the teams that had already gone live, which is, as I said, the family support teams, that was very positive. And later on, we can see the impact that's had on their ability to keep caseloads down and manage their work differently, which is really good. The teams that are still focusing a lot of our attention is the front door, the IFD, and the assessment team. The IFD still doesn't have a manager, although we are looking to resolve that, and I think within a short space of time, I would think a couple of weeks, we should have a manager in post. And the assessment teams, we've got 2 managers, we should have 3. That said, the 2 are working extremely hard, along with the new interim service manager who started about 3 weeks or so ago. And again, they've had a significant impact on the work in the system. So it's actually improving in that area at quite some pace, albeit with a manager down. In terms of caseloads, this shows what the actual caseload is. This is across all the teams, and what the target should be. The target, as you can see, it's about 16 is what we want, but we are somewhere in the mid-20s across the whole team. And as I say, there are some teams where it's far higher. So it's an average, but an average across some varied teams. This one shows what it would be if all our posts were filled. So if we had no vacancies, we'd be very close to reaching our target. We'd still be slightly over, which suggests we've got more work to do in terms of reducing the caseloads further, so that if we had fully staffed teams, we would be on target. And you know, ideally some teams will be far below that, the teams that are doing that more intensive work with young people. In terms of the staff and the caseloads, you can see there's 3 teams where they are fully staffed with permanent workers, and the team that stands out as the most concerning in terms of having agency workers is the team in the middle, the assessment team. At the minute, they got 4 permanent workers and 9 agency, albeit 2 of those agency are looking to become permanent, but still they're heavily reliant on agency workers. And I guess, you know, if you had to think of one team where you may not want, or where you could, if you had to choose which team would have agency workers in, it probably would be the assessment team because of the short nature of their work. So work is coming and closing down ideally within a space of 6 to 9 weeks. You wouldn't want to see that ratio of permanent workers in some of the longer term teams, and certainly not over the children in our care, because you'd had such a turnover of workers. That said, we are working to try and bring that down, and as I said, we've got 2 that are looking to go permanent, and there's another person being interviewed, I think, on Friday, again a permanent worker, which is good, but it is still far higher. The other thing about this team is the caseloads, and you can see that the average there is 33, and if you've got someone with 48, that's about 20, 30 more than you would want them to have ideally. So that's a lot of children that they've got against their name. At the moment, though, the average has now come down. I looked this morning and it's come down to 24 in that team, which is quite a shift. And as I was saying, there's a lot of work taking place to close off assessments and to get more on top of the work. And looking at the assessments as a whole, at the end of May, we had 625 assessments open in the service. That's all the teams. That's not just the assessment team, although they carry the bulk of it. And as of this morning, we've got 408, which is the lowest it's been for about 13 months. So that's a tremendous amount of work has taken place, primarily in the assessment team, but across other teams as well, to reduce the number of assessments that we've got open, which means that children's needs are being met that much more quickly because we're not sitting waiting for an assessment to be completed. And obviously, hand in hand with that means that we've got less children that are open in the system. Again, at the end of May, we had 1,871 children. This morning we got 1,674, so that's 200 plus children less open in the service as well, which all that speaks to the pressure reducing somewhat. It's still a lot, and as you can see, some teams still have quite a higher caseload, but it is going in the right direction, and it's been quite a significant turnaround in the last 6 weeks or so to reduce that number. As I said, recruitment is ongoing. That is happening across the piece. The performance, this is as of, I think, the end of June. I'm looking at Dan, I think it was 29th of June, something like that, we did this from. And so it captures a full month, which is why we can show June, really. The rate of referrals is still far higher than we would want. It's sort of twice as much as what we would expect to have. And again, partly that is driven by the genuine increase in contacts that are then converted into referrals. But the other part of it is, I think, still of our own doing in terms of us converting contacts into referrals that perhaps we needn't have done so, and looking for a statutory intervention or a statutory response when I think we could be more considered at the front door. And I think that speaks to not having the management oversight that we would want at the front door at the moment. Although, as I said, that is close to being resolved, which is really positive. The rate of Section 47s, which is a child protection investigation, that has come down from a sort of a high from October through to March. Really, it was twice as much, if not more, than what we would want. And I looked this morning, it is actually down to 13, which is our target. Slight caveat to that is there may be some lag in the system in terms of needing to create Section 47s, but it is still as a like-for-like measure, it is below what we have been for some time, which is good. It's getting nearer to where we need to be, which shows less reactive measures being taken, and that we are starting to manage the risk in a much better way and being more thoughtful about those that do need a Section 47 investigation and those that don't. Assessment timeliness has gone up in the last month, which is really good, last month being June. And the visits, child protection and children in care, the visits are above the target, and the child in need visits is 1% below. So it's very close to having all three either at target or within, which again, considering the volume of work that we've had in the system, that's impressive that we've nearly got all three in line with where we want to be. Case supervision as well is above target, 80%. Ideally, we'd want that to be far higher than that, sort of 90s or 100%, which for some teams it is. Some of the family support teams are very pleased to tell us how they were 100%, which is fantastic. It's very good anyway, but it's good that they're now, you know, they're recognizing that and taking pride in the fact that they reached 100%, which is a really good thing. ICPC timeliness is close to being 95. It's normally 95 or 100. It is pretty good actually. And again, I would expect that to be back to where it's normally at, which is in the greens. Children on a CP plan, we can see that is higher than we would want, and I think we're at 224 this morning. So that would suggest we need to be somewhere in the sort of 160s, that sort of area, 160 up to 170, that sort of figure we would want to be at, rather than 224. And children that are looked after, that is high again as well. We got 312 children looked after this morning. I know that there are 7 that should be closing, which will come down because they've now turned 18, but it is high, is trending up at the moment, which we don't want. And that sort of goes hand in hand with the placement sufficiency and the pressures that we can see in that area. The key figure to look for here is children that are in residential homes. At the minute it's showing 46, or I think it's actually 44 this morning, so it's down a little bit, but it is still twice as much as what we would want. Doing a bit of piece of work over the weekend, I can see that actually it's one particular age group that is causing the pressure, which is those aged 12 to 14. The account for it's about 34% of the children that are in residential. It's gone from being 4 about 2 and a bit years ago to now being 15. So it's quite a leap in terms of that quite narrow age group, and sort of a small definition as well of children in residential. And I know, talking to Mel, she will tell me that is the difficulty when we have a child that is in a foster placement, and it's usually a foster placement that is then on the verge of breakdown. It is really hard to then find carers that will come forward to look after a 13-year-old girl, for instance, that needs a foster carer. On the back of that, we're looking at all the carers that we have who are looking after children in that age group to make sure that we are confident that the placements are stable and there isn't the sign of instability that would need us to do something different. And if we do, then we will, because we want to make sure that children can remain in a family setting and not have the disruption of moving out of that into residential, severing links with schools in some cases, and all the health provision that goes around them, never mind family and community and friends. So it's trying to make sure that we do all we can to preserve that relationship with a foster family, so that we don't see more children coming into care and into residential. There's a lot of work going on to try and move children out of residential, and we don't want to simply just replace them with new children that have had a breakdown in a placement. And it is often children that are already looked after that we find moving into residential settings. It's unusual that we have I mean, it does happen, but it's more likely that they will be in care already, rather than they're not known to us and they come into the family support team and then they're into residential. It does happen, but it's more often children that are already in our care. Yarlswood, I think Mel talked very clearly about Yarlswood and the difficulties that we're having there in terms of meeting the needs of the young people in the time that is needed. She was there today. I've not heard back from her how that's gone today, but I will catch up with her tomorrow and see if there's been any shifting in terms of the support that we may be able to receive, either from the Home Office directly or from the association that could also do age assessments and see whether there is support for us, because as we keep on labouring to the Home Office, we are a very small authority. We've got finite resources, and it's a lot of work that has unexpectedly come our way. I think roughly, I think it's about 30 young people need an age assessment, and I think 12 have been accommodated. So again, that feeds into the figure of the looked after children going up. So it's generating a lot of work that was otherwise not expected 6 months or so ago. In terms of quality assurance, Dan, are you okay to talk through briefly the findings on this? Is that okay? Because I know it is your...
Yeah, sure.
Yes, go on, thank you.
That's all right, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Because I've had a bit of audio trouble. Yeah, lovely.
Yep.
All right. So one of the findings in the ILACs last year was that the department needed to pick up more auditing. We need to increase our activity, and we've had some increase in resource to do that. I was pleased to see in the focus visit that we had earlier this year that Ofsted recognised the improved line of sight we have on practice, and that there's a good range of quality assurance activity. So that's the good bit. The tricky message, I suppose, is that if we were inspected tomorrow, we would expect a very similar outcome to the one we had last summer. And that's about variability of practice. And it's important to recognise in the variability, there are some teams, some workers, some individuals delivering some really high quality practice. And I think that was reflected in the focus visit as well. You could see some outstanding elements in there. But our challenge is that it isn't consistent enough across the piece. And what we find, I think, as a little bit of a theme is that frontline managers are feeling very stretched, as are their social workers. So they're not necessarily taking or being allowed the time to reflect and think ahead and plan ahead. They're getting to work and very much reacting to what's going on the day. And that is reflected really through the system. So we see that the initial capture of contacts, referrals and case recording, moderate levels of good entry points, but often when we're moderating and when we're taking that second look at it, we go down to RI. We do some multi-agency auditing, so alongside the police, schools and health, and our independent scrutineer at the front door looking at contacts, strategy meetings and section 47s. And we see that same picture, that real variability, that kind of people doing things in the moment rather than stepping back and having a little bit of a think about how do I manage this. So we've done some workshops with the team leaders, and we're starting to see some I'm not sure green shoot is a bit bold, but some improvement in things. And Jonathan's highlighted section 47s as a good example of that. Our assessment quality is variable at the moment, and we do some really good ones, and we do some ones where it feels very sort of rushed. And what we're not seeing, I think, is assessments that lead to the right service always. Sometimes they're taking quite a long time to get there. So that whole front end of the system, we think by improving the resource and quality of practice in the integrated front door, we will see the rest of the system sort of follow. So I know that Jonathan has some plans to increase social work capacity at the front door, and we think that's going to be a really positive step as long as they've got some strong leadership over the top. What we find in terms of planning is that this is a weaker area, and what's happening for families is that they are experiencing multiple plans. So they might have their child in need plan, their children in care plan, whatever the plan may be. But then there's also a plan that's run in supervision. There might be a plan that's run with the school. So the task really to improve that is to bring the plans together. So there's one plan for the family that everyone's working to, that plan is measurable and has some kind of outcome for the child that's positive. And we're not just lost in referrals or other actions. So there's a real challenge around planning, and I think that's something that we need to take forward. We do see some very good direct work with children, but not consistently enough. And some of that, perhaps it's the way that visits are recorded, but certainly the feedback from children and young people is that they're sometimes not quite sure why their social work is there. So we need to help them understand why. Why have you gone out to see this family other than you've got a deadline to do a visit? And making sure that workers have the time to do that. In the family support team, since they've moved to their new structure and their caseloads have balanced out, we're starting to see some slightly better pictures. I've sort of talked about management oversight, but it is it is there that managers sort of seem to be running from one supervision to the next. Multi-agency working is stronger overall, with some high good ratings, but some drift back to RI. We have some capacity issues in terms of availability for strategy meetings in health and the police, and that can be very challenging for our teams on the ground and getting to quick results when we need to make safeguarding decisions around children. So that's something that we're taking forward with our partners. In terms of thinking about children's backgrounds and their lived experience, that's much more balanced. That's something that workers seem very focused on and wanting to capture. Permanency planning, so thinking about those children in our care who are going to be there till adulthood, have we secured that in some way? It's variable. We know that once we get into permanency, that the outcomes for children are quite good, be that through adoption, through family care, through foster care or other arrangements. We know that the outcomes are generally quite good. But the journey there can be a bit fragmented, and Mel is going to lead a piece of work to increase oversight in that space and change the process so it's a little bit clearer who leads permanency planning when we're in court. The IRO and CP chair impact, we know that they have probably the most long-standing relationships with children out of our workforce and can do some really good stuff. But what we're finding is perhaps sometimes they're not challenging as robustly or as clearly as they should do. So that's a piece of work for that team as well. But I think overall, if you sort of want to take a message away from this, it's variability. We see so much difference in experience of service from one family to another.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan and Dan, for that. I mean, it's a mixed picture. It is really great to see some of those ratios looking right finally. For example, the rate of S47s, which is now with our at target, which is really brilliant. Some of the Dan's comments, are quite concerning, and I guess it's it comes down to training, and you've identified the problem. As I say, it's now a way of seeing our way through it. So Hilda, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, I mean, the question was on the quality assurance. Is it mainly an issue with not having the time to do it or the capacity to do it versus not having the necessary training to do it? So do you, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, sorry, guys, go on.
It's a bit of both. We're not going to be able to address the skill issue until the capacity issue is addressed, I think is the route through. Yeah. So we have seen, without sort of getting into individuals, we've seen some people who've been really struggling, but when their caseload comes right, you start to see the quality of work improve. So I think we're not really getting a true assessment of what our workers will perform like until their caseloads get to something more sensible, and to maybe sort of throw it into a frame that is more perhaps people will understand a little better. You could take your best class teacher and give them 100 children. They're probably not going to do very well in that class. If you get their class size down to 25, they will do much better. And we know that some of our workers are dealing with that kind of ratio, that kind of magnitude of workload. So it's very hard, I think, to work out whether it's skills for the teams that are in that state. For the teams where caseloads have been better, we can identify some areas of training, and we do have a program going on. And we're working with a sector-led improvement partner to do some systemic training and bring people back to that thoughtfulness that will really push us forward, and working with families rather than trying to push them through the system.
Right. Paul?
Oh yeah, fine. Thank you, Chair. So the assessment team casework average of 33, I mean, it hides that significant variation with one team member on 48. But I mean, obviously, I'm pleased to hear that this is reducing given the latest data. But what kind of cases are being held by the workers with the highest loads? Because, I mean, as Dan said, there are still concerns with many of them not reaching the good status. I mean, could you assure us that no child is receiving delayed or reduced safeguarding activity because of those workloads?
I mean, I think all the children that are in the family support teams, or certainly those teams, they will be initially assessed by the assessment team. There are some children that will go straight into the children disabilities team where they do their own assessments, and similarly with the academy, they will do their own assessments there. But the majority of children that are open will start in the assessment team, and it tends to be that actually the children that are at risk and identified as being at risk, those are the ones that are prioritized. And the children that are where there is an assessment that has gone beyond the 9 weeks, and I keep stressing 9 weeks is an awful long time to do an assessment. It's far too long. But the ones that takes 9 weeks or beyond 9 weeks, they're the ones where in the worker's mind, that's going to close and there's no role for us. So you can see the temptation to leave that one because actually it's already dormant in their mind. The family, you hope, will be aware that this is the case, but actually it's going to be closed into the system. So they will always be focusing on the ones that are of the more pressing, which is going to be the children that there may be a risk and and the need for an initial child protection conference. Those are the ones that will be addressed first. It's not ideal, but it is how they will work when they are in that state. And as Dan was saying, if you can extrapolate to the other industries where you just have to prioritize your time because you haven't got the time to do all the things you want to do in the time that you should be doing it in. Otherwise, authorities would just have social workers with caseloads of 50 all across the country. We know it doesn't work like that because that's what happens when the caseloads are too high. And I think we need to own that as a system, really, that's what people are grappling with. And it's impressive that they've done the work and has got the work down as much as they have in the short time that they've done that in the last 6 weeks or so. So I'm impressed by what they've done, and I'm optimistic that it's going to come down further and we will start to see. I mean, I did challenge, I said we need to have no assessments that are out of time. And I said a couple of weeks ago, I said 4 weeks, that should be it. That should be all you need to get them down to zero. As of this morning, there are 10 assessments in the assessment team that are out of time. About 3 months ago, there was over 100. So again, it has come down significantly. Other teams have now got more out of time, teams that shouldn't have. But the assessment team are slowly getting things back on track and getting on top of it, which will then have a big impact on our ability to, as a whole, have assessments done within time in terms of our KPI that goes off to the regional data crunchers in the tartan rug, because at the minute we're probably lagging behind. They're the ones that are going to drive that performance. It's those children that go through the assessment team. They do the bulk of it. So if they can run with no out of time, then things will start to jag up quite quickly, really.
Okay. Could I just ask one question?
Go ahead.
It might be just a bit of an aside, actually, but I was reading that the council has adopted, is it Intelligent Eye for projecting statistics and what have you into the future, and Children's Services is adopting that. In what areas is that coming out?
It's across the piece, but Dan is our guru on this, so I will again leave to Dan.
So what it will do, as you will probably see from the data reports you get, we're a bit underdeveloped as a local authority in terms of our dashboards and our use of data. So we have a lot of data, but what Intelligent Eye will do is provide us with the dashboards that sit on top. So they're not going to create new data. They're going to take what's there and give it in a form that we can manipulate, we can look at, and it will be much more live. So, for example, as a manager trying to track assessment timeliness, you will see what's out. You'll be able to log in the morning, see what's outstanding in your team, what's coming up tomorrow, what's coming up next week, and help plan your time. Whereas at the moment, our data is quite retrospective. It tells you what you achieved last week. And so it's going to go across the piece. So it follows the same data that Ofsted collect. So we already have that. We know it. And so it'll follow everything from when someone picks up the phone to say, I'm really worried about a child, right the way through to leaving care. So it'll provide a whole suite of dashboards. And then over the 4 years, there'll be trials to develop more and more as the system develops going on.
So does that mean, sorry, so does that mean sort of like the data that we see in these reports we could actually get like some more forward predicting data in them, rather than, because I mean what we get is like, this is what's happened,
Yeah.
Whereas we could actually start to see what is starting to happen.
Yes, that's exactly that.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you.
That's really impressive if it works. But
yeah,
it sounds as if it is. Sounds as if it is. Brilliant. Carl, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Again, I'm still struggling with sound, but I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm just looking for some assurance really around the numbers of children we currently have in homes within the borough. I know in my ward, I've at least 3, maybe 4 houses that have been converted into homes by private companies. I'm going to be honest with you, some seem better than others. My understanding is that from time to time, these homes at short notice accept children from other boroughs as well, or as an emergency sometimes. But I just wonder, at any given time, are we absolutely sure of the numbers that we have within our borough?
We'd need to look through some data and have a look at it. I did an exercise a while ago for, I think it was Councillor Headley, just to assure him of the number of children that are in Bedford, and it was a small number. This is in terms of, I think it was residential at the time, and we know that in terms of residential placements in Bedford, we don't have that many. Most residential placements are going to be outside Bedford, but we know there are a number of homes opened that are, they do have children in, and they are from elsewhere. They're not from Bedford. And similarly with some of the supported accommodation provisions as well. There will be young people that are not from Bedford that are staying in them as well.
So just to come back on that, hypothetically speaking, purely hypothetically, if we had 3 children tonight placed in homes in the Bedford borough from outside our borough, how quickly would we know about this, or would we know about this?
We should, every authority that places a child, they should notify the host authority that child is in their area.
Right. Okay.
Some authorities are better than others at doing that, and some authorities are better than others that saying the child is no longer in your area.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, just for clarification, Carl. So in that situation, we're the host authority. We're not the responsible authority. The responsible authority is the authority that places the children.
Yeah.
But I know it can be quite disconcerting at a ward level, because, as you say, some of these homes aren't as well run as there might be.
No. Okay. Thanks for that.
Okay. So any other points on the improvement plan? If not, we'll carry on to item 6 to talk about permanent exclusions and the alternative provision offer. So over to Chris and Alison.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just checking, can everyone hear me okay? On that point, perfect. Just want to double check on the sounds. And so just for sake of clarity, I'm going to just try and summarize the report that's before you this evening. So just to remind members that the report was requested to cover not only what is being tried to do to reduce the number of exclusions in Bedford Borough, but also to give some more information about what happens to children in Bedford Borough after they've been excluded. And I'm delighted to be joined by Alison Pullen, who's our Head of Inclusion Service and the Virtual School Head Teacher, as well as Vanessa Miller, who's the Head Teacher of Grace Education Centre, and Catherine, who's the CEO of Built. And so they're here to also answer any questions that you might have following the report. Members will also be aware this is not the first time that we've discussed exclusions at the committee, particularly regarding to when we're looking at statistics and different data, sadly because Bedford Borough has for some time had a statistically higher rate of permanent exclusions in our schools than the national average. As with any sort of statistic or any data, there's always wide ranges of that, and sometimes you can say there's some skewed data from 0 excluding authorities, but actually there's use of internal exclusions, etc., along those lines. But however, I think it's fair to say, and I've been public in saying that I do think our rate of exclusions is too high, and especially when you get into it in terms of looking at some avoidable exclusions that we could have worked better on to try and avoid some of those exclusions. I'm not going to go through each of the sort of the elements of the report. It's a very detailed report, but you'll see there's graphs and data that show the different ages and regions for permanent exclusions over the past 3 years, which I'm sure that some people might have any questions on. The focus of the report is a lot about the changes that have been made in the last 12 to 18 months. And if I link this back to some of the presentations that you'd have heard from me talking about the work that we need to do for improving educational outcomes for children and young people, you'll hear that I would say this is not just solely a school issue. You see, our education strategy became an education strategy rather than a school improvement strategy, to recognise that actually, in order to actually shift and move some of these challenges that we have within our schools, we need to work together as a system. It's not just about what happens within the class. And the same is true for exclusions. Just simply telling schools the data isn't good enough is not a solution. Simply telling schools to not exclude children is not a solution. We need to work together, and no head teacher takes the decision to exclude lightly. So, we need to look internally as well as a local authority about what our offer was to school. Some of you, and apologies, anyone who's heard me say this before, I'd give an anecdote of about 2.5 years ago. We had an internal meeting, and I called an internal meeting where I said I want to have a meeting about the high rates of exclusion in Bedford Borough. And there were double-digit officers on this call. It was a Teams call, all of whom had a part to play in helping and supporting children to try and reduce exclusions, but not one of whom had the accountability or the responsibility of saying my service's role is to reduce exclusions in Bedford Borough. And that was also played out when I was going to speak to head teachers, and head teachers would tell me, okay, if I'd say, if you're thinking about excluding a child, who are you calling? And some people would call our senior inclusion officer at the time, Dave Roberts, who would give a very, his duty was about our legal duties in day 6 and making sure that all the appropriate actions had been taken. Or some might speak to Tim Long, my head of SEND, or some might speak to me, or some might speak to early help. And actually, it was different, and there might be different messages. And it was clear that we needed to look at this internally and make some changes to make it clearer, so that we had one service who was really working on reducing exclusions, working closely with Grays Education Centre, and also so that schools were clear on where they could go to support, and also have that accountability on having the service plans to try and reduce exclusions and working clearly on a plan to try and do that. And I think actually I then did a review, and we had meetings of our schools and our behaviour leads in schools, and it was called at the time the Fair Access Panel meeting, and we had similar challenges of meetings were online, meetings were, there wasn't the accountability, it was too easy for cases to be discussed and no school to put their hand up and take the schools, and it wasn't working where we needed to be. So in 24-25, we made some changes. We changed the Fair Access panel meeting, and we named it the Securing Education panel. We shared much more data openly with schools, and in fact, last academic year, I chaired every single one of those meetings to try and actually move things forward and see that increased collaboration, more proactive working, starting to think about actually not just talking about children who were at risk of exclusion at the sharp end, but actually schools bringing together cases where there's peer-to-peer support, talking about some challenges they might be facing across a cohort of children, and sharing of that best practice and learning. And that was all supported as well by a newly created Fair Access officer system within our school admission service, who's really driven that through the paperwork, making sure that those cases are being brought forward and supporting the administration of that meeting. In summer 2025, we also undertook a restructure to create a new inclusion service sitting underneath Alison, who at the time was the head teacher of the virtual school, and expanding her roles and responsibility, creating more capacity within that service and creating new roles that are listed within the report. We're already starting to see the difference it's making to schools and having that one single dedicated service to speak to when their child is at risk of being excluded. That clarity of saying you pick up the phone and you speak to the inclusion service, having a dedicated primary inclusion lead, having a dedicated secondary inclusion lead is already starting to pay dividends for doing that. Now, the service has only been fully staffed since the beginning of June, so in terms of we've had some gaps, but in terms of that, so we're already thinking about what that's going to look like moving forward, and you see the report again talks about some of those steps that are being taken place. But the key thing here is around, actually we've had some real successes of talking about children and young people where schools feel quite stuck and they feel like actually it's quite complicated, and actually giving them some advice and guidance, trying to wrap around that support. But we want to get even earlier upstream. We want to talk about, actually be proactive and having dedicated meetings, not waiting for schools to contact us, but actually having regular meetings with schools to say, talk to us about the children you're concerned about, talk about the ones that you're struggling. Sometimes this is a case of the schools are asking for help, but the system is not supporting. It might be, they feel they're getting stuck in the SEND system. It might be that actually there's issues outside with youth offending service. There might be issues, and actually the inclusion service can pull together some of that package of support and really walk alongside schools to support that. And it's going to really dovetail with our plans that are coming out of our SEND reform plan. More on that at the next overview and scrutiny committee, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but it will work really well together. The report also gives details on our statutory duties under the Education Act 1996, and that effectively puts the responsibilities on the local authority to put in place day 6 education following a permanent exclusion. It's a really interesting piece in that the local authority has absolutely no influence over a head teacher's decision to permanently exclude or not, in terms of that is the head teacher's responsibility. We can have all the best laid plans in the world, but we're not in the room often when those exclusions are taking place. But the statutory duty is on us to make sure that child receives an education on day 6. How we do that in Bedford Borough is we commission Grays Education Centre to deliver our day 6 education. So children will go on to roll at Grays. Grays are able to offer small group environments, specialist teachers, range of subjects, also doing fantastic work with the young people, trauma-informed practice around the reasons why they may have been excluded, also supporting with those young people on preparing them for reintegration back into education. This is, a child being excluded does not mean that child is excluded from mainstream education for the rest of their time. The first goal and priority for us is to try and support that young person to then be ready to reintegrate back into education. And being reintegration back into mainstream education takes place again via our Securing Education panel. Grays will have worked with the family to identify schools that the young person would like to attend, as well as mapping any schools which might not be such a good match for the young person. So, for example, there might be some issues within the community in certain schools that young person might not be the best mix, or might be the reason for the exclusion could be that actually, if there's schools in close proximity, going to the neighbouring school might not be the reason, the best decision for that particular young person. The case is brought, or the child is brought to Securing Education. I must say the child is brought in terms of, and actually, we do look at the best outcomes for this young person, and a new school place is then identified, and support from Grays continues as the child continues to start at the new school to aid the transition for the young person, to make sure there's that bridging into the new school environment. Now, sometimes, and we've talked about this at this committee before, sometimes a child with an education, health and care plan might be excluded. So in these situations, the child will still attend Grays unless it is not deemed appropriate. For example, it might be that a child has been permanently excluded from a special school, and actually it's identified and all professionals agree that that child would not manage at Grays. But in many cases, those children with education, health and care plans will be receiving their education at Grays. In other cases, children might be excluded without an EHCP, but when they're at Grays, it's identified that actually there's some unmet needs, that actually this child does require an education, health and care plan. Grays and the SENCO at Grays works to then apply for an education, health and care needs assessment, and the child then receives an EHCP. As a side note, and many people have heard me before, but I think a child who is permanently excluded without an EHCP, who then has needs identified when they're in Grays Education Centre and get an EHCP, is a definition of a system failure. And I've said this repeatedly to our schools. We need to learn from that and identify what is happening for that. Why was that child's education, health and care needs assessment request not submitted by the previous school before they were excluded? Sometimes it might be they were on the pathway and we continue on, but we do need to really look hard on ourselves on that. But in both of those cases where the child has an EHCP, just to be clear, the SEND team take the lead on the naming of the next education placement, maybe into mainstream, back into mainstream, it may not be. And that is done in collaboration with Grays and the other professionals working with the child. Finally, the report also helpfully talks about some of the next steps that we are looking at putting in place. And you can probably tell, but I'm quite excited by the work that we've already seen that's started. I think it is about, a lot of this work is about relationships, relational, and the practice and the building on, but also schools are buying in and very much keen to work with us on finding the solutions to address our exclusion rates. We've seen some real positive reductions, particularly in our primary exclusions already this year, and we've seen some real successes in some individual secondary schools and as a collective to look on how we can build on that and develop our offer even further in 26, 27. Just want to publicly thank Alison for writing of the report and for her work in heading up that new inclusion service so far this year, and also to Vanessa and Catherine for the work they're doing in Grays Education Centre as our commissioned service. That's the report as it is before you. I'll just hand you back now to you, Chair, for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Chris. So yeah, I've got a couple of questions and comments, but over to the committee initially. Paul.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, I'm sure you probably answered this question before in previous years, but I mean, there's about 58% of exclusions for years 9 and 10. What is happening with years 9 and 10? Is it the transition to GCSEs, or is it? I mean, what is happening?
Alison, do you have a view on this? And I'm sure Vanessa, you probably have a view on this as well.
Yeah, so I think what happens, we've done a lot of work having a look at the transition from year 6 to year 7, and there's a whole host of education, health and care plan applications that go in at year 6. When you look at why people want an education, health and care plan, it says because of transition to secondary school. And so I think that's a massive pinch point, that children get to year 6 and suddenly primary schools are panicking, thinking, oh my goodness, we've coped with this young person for the whole of primary. Now they're going to move into secondary and they're going to really struggle. So I think what's happening is that we get, that transition into year 7, and actually they're fairly well managed throughout year 7. But then the cracks begin to show, I think, and then they might be subject to suspensions, and they don't have an education, health and care plan. They're not getting that extra support that they need, and then things start really falling apart once they get into year 8, and then by year 9 and year 10, like you say, obviously the pressure of GCSEs, and I think that's when it all falls apart and they end up at risk or being permanently excluded. I also think it's an age thing as well.
Thanks. Thanks, Alison. I mean, Vanessa, you're seeing these young people coming in, obviously, into Grays. Is there anything else or any commonalities that you're seeing, or reasons that you think that year 9 and 10 in particular are spikes? I mean, that has been relatively consistent, Councillor Edmonds, as well. I think we've talked about
I can see from the previous years.
But yeah, I don't know, Vanessa, if you've got a view.
I think I would agree with Alison in terms of, when students are getting into year 7, we do see that there's that dip initially, but then they kind of get swept up into the life of secondary life. I think Chris raised a really good point earlier on, that we need to be encouraging our secondary schools to be applying for EHCPs when they're needed, and making sure that SEND registers are accurate so that we know what the needs are for those young people. And hopefully with the new reforms that also Chris has mentioned earlier on, that we'll start to see that happening across schools. I think what's interesting though, what's changed in the last 2 years since I've been at Grays, is the demographics of pupils that are being excluded. We're seeing a lot more girls now at year 10 and 11, so just to be mindful of that. But it goes like this, I think if you look back through the data, things kind of peak and trough at different times of the year, depending what's going on contextually in Bedford. But yeah, there's a whole host of reasons, and it's about the support that we can put around families to support students as they're moving through secondary school.
Yeah, so you're able to see the patterns developing in the earlier years as to, I mean, is it almost like you can predict which children are going to start becoming an issue in those later years?
Yeah,
I think certainly what I would say is for some, we do sometimes still have some serious one-offs, and I think in terms of in terms of that, actually they are that as a challenge in terms of if there is a serious significant physical assault, or if there's sharing of sexual images and contact. Sometimes those young people genuinely, we had no prior, they weren't hitting some of the markers on those points. But that proactive element of the offer that I talked about is for that reason. And some head teachers will say the same thing of going, actually, we know the cohort that we're really hoping actually might settle through, but there are some that we are worried about, and that's the ones we need to go, well, actually, what is the support plans? Does each of those young people have a plan and action? Have we done early help assessments? Have we put support in place? The only thing else, I think, just linked to the year 9 and 10 question, Councillor Edmonds, is to say, actually, I think the curriculum review is a really interesting piece to have a look at that, because I think there is, some inferences there around, there's been a slight narrowing of curriculum and losing of some vocational subjects in Key Stage 4, and actually that being a challenge for some of our young people. Not everyone does well in some of those more academic sort of subjects or not, and especially building on that, some of the things around, if we're talking about unmet SEND needs, if we're talking about actually it's difficult being a teenager and it's wanting to sort of fit in, let alone if you feel that actually you are behind your peers, you're struggling to engage academically, you're feeling less of then because of that. Maybe you're feeling, in terms of like, not intended, you're struggling to engage. Actually, all of those things can lead to young people disengaging from learning, or actually thinking it's better to get kicked out of a lesson than it is to actually then to be seen to actually be struggling. All of these things are really and that in the context of also you've got a class teacher trying to manage 30 young people in those bits is why we, it is a case of it's a challenge that we all need to work together on, trying to address it and trying to work together. But I do think there is something also there, and the curriculum review starts to highlight some of those things, which is kind of moving towards a potential review as well into whether we've lost something in some of the moving away from vocational subjects, and maybe there's opportunities for us to think about a slightly broadening of some of those pathways as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Hilda, over to you.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. The first one is a numbers question. Chris, you mentioned that that we still feel that permanent exclusions are too high. And when I look at the data, it looks like this year is higher than last year, for example, still in spite of the interventions and the inclusion service. Do we have almost like a target in mind? How do we want to how much do we want to see this reduced by? Do we say 10%, or what is good? I think that's what I'm trying to grasp.
It's a really good question, and it's one that we have, I'll be honest, I'm not going to name a local authority in this one, because I think that'd be unfair to my colleagues and some of the local authorities, but I'll give you an example. There is a local authority that is a zero excluding authority. So, they've all agreed and they've said, we're not going to permanently exclude a young person. So their data is 0. Now, we had a young person move in from that local authority to Bedford Borough and have spent the previous 2 years at their school going for 2 hours a day to an internal AP, alternative provision within that school for 2 hours a day. Now, that child hadn't been permanently excluded, but I would argue that actually, if that child had been permanently excluded in Bedford Borough, they would have got a better offer than 2 hours a day in an internal AP. And therefore, I do think we've got to be careful. And I've been open about saying, I don't think the target is to say, should be just 0 exclusions or those particular points. I think what I would say is 0 avoidable exclusions, in terms of, and actually for those young people that if we can see it's coming, we shouldn't be just sitting and watching this happen. And then, and so if we can work on reducing those permanent exclusions, then we should be. I do think, as Vanessa used the wavy, analogy that I often do, so I'm glad that she's also a mathematician like me, it is hard, and in terms of, and actually each year group is going to be kind of different, but I would certainly, looking at a reduction, I don't want to give a specific, but I would be saying something along the lines of, we want to see something like a 15% reduction, if not more. We've had a much bigger production of that in our permanent exclusions. We do need to have a target, and we do need to understand why, but we need to understand where it's going. The interesting point is obviously what the data, there's a big lag in the data, so the published data that you'll get in our children's services reports is often what the DFE is, but it's on a rate, so it's per certain percentage of per 100 pupils. But we've got a secondary school at this moment that their rate is over 1, so that's every 1 in every 100 children children in that school as being permanently excluded. Like that, they're in agreement that rate is too high, and actually, you don't want to be sitting in an assembly hall looking around and going, 2 of us or 3 of us every single year we're going to get permanently excluded. So yeah, we need to see a reduction in that. But in terms of and I do think one of the things that we've got a meeting next week, Alison and I, from an inclusion service point of view, is around kind of setting some of those targets on where we want to be. If you look at our targets in terms of on the children's services and improvement, well, not improvement, on children's services business report, it's to be in line with national is our starting point, and that's normally about a rate of 0.12 from memory exclusions on that. Now, in terms of, that's just off the top of my head, so I need to double check that one. So in terms of for minutes, Ellie, but we don't quote exactly 0.12, but it's around about there for our rate of exclusions, where certainly for some of our young people, we're seeing rates of 0.24, 0.36, certainly in different categories of need. Sorry, Alison, were you going to come in and help me out with the statistics?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. No, I was just going to say, I think it's really important to note that obviously it's our secondary schools where we have the issue. So Gemma, she's our primary inclusion lead. She's been in post right from the very beginning of this service, right from the 1st of October, and we can see the impact that she's had. You can see that in the figures, but also, sort of our qualitative data as well. But Claire, who's our new secondary inclusion lead, only started on the 1st of June. So she's only been with us 5 weeks. So she hasn't had that opportunity to have that impact. So I've been sort of trying to manage those conversations as well as do, the more strategic stuff as well. So hopefully now that Claire's with us, she will begin to have the same impact as Gemma as well, because that's where we really need to see it.
Thanks.
I've got another question. Can I ask my second question? It's more because I don't quite understand the whole kind of alternative provision idea. I had a look at your alternative provision directory. So is it can the schools commission alternative provision for their pupils almost as a preventative measure to exclusion, or how does it work?
Yeah, so that would be something that we would encourage. So we may have a meeting with the school around their, tricky children, or they might phone and say, this young person really struggling, being suspended, at risk. And so we would absolutely say, have you looked at alternative provision? So it may be that this young person, really struggling to cope with a full-time timetable. So it may be that some schools would put them on 2 days in an alternative provision and then 3 days in a school, or something along those lines. So it's absolutely a strategy that we would suggest for schools. They do have to pay for that, obviously.
That was my next question.
Yeah. It can be quite pricey, but we do also have some really good local options. People like Canoe Trail in Kempston. Yes, you have to pay for it, but it's a lot cheaper than some of the other alternative provisions that we've got. So yes, it is a strain on some of the school budgets, but we can always look at helping them out with that, especially if they've got an education, health and care plan.
I was just going to say it's also part of, so in any Ofsted inspection of a school, there's they'll be looking at does the school use alternative provision, and in terms of making sure that if they do use alternative provision, the school as the commissioner then are responsible for ensuring that all appropriate safeguards are in place. It's of good quality. They're doing some QA checks themselves. As a local authority, as well, and there's things around, we do support with some commissioning of alternative provision. Are part of our ongoing conversation and part of our work through our inclusion strategy and working through is trying to get that clarity as to what is, and nationally this is the same, what constitutes a local authority commission place, or what constitutes the school going off and commissioning the same place themselves. I think some of the challenges that we've seen, so interestingly, last year, so you asked the question around last year we piloted using some funding that we have within our education improvement strategic grants and schools-based money grant as well, in giving all of our secondary schools £20,000 to commission additional funding to commission AP. And I think we had it's interesting, the review as to whether nationally exclusions went down last year anyway, but you know, in terms of was to look at that to say, actually, is it a resourcing issue as well? Is it a case of actually, if it was a case of could we shift some of our resources into it, and some of the learning around it? So all of this is part of our, you know, moving forward and conversation. We've got conversation again tomorrow around some of our, you know, strategies for what our 3-tier of AP that the SEND reforms are asking us to move towards. What does this look like so we actually have the best outcomes for children and young people, and actually we maximise and get as many young people getting the support as early as we can. Without the challenge of, back to that point of statutorily, if a school permanently excludes a child, the local authorities we're responsible to pick up the costs of providing the education in place of that, regardless of what has and hasn't happened beforehand. We want to kind of work on going, well, can we then maybe look at our resources or support, or, you know, working with our schools as early as we can to try and avoid that happening. But it's a challenge. As I said, we don't have, you know, I can't tell a head teacher not to permanently exclude a child. It's not us as a local authority who'll take me out of it. It's not something we have the, you know, we have the accountability but not the responsibility, if that makes sense, for the Day 6 education.
Thank you.
Okay, perhaps I can just put a question, and it's from the point of view of being a school governor. And occasionally, I've had to be on a governor review panel, and I usually agree with a head teacher's decision to permanently exclude. I hate having to do it. But when there are situations of extreme disruption or violence against a pupil or whatever, it's something that I have to do. But I'm really grateful, Vanessa, to you and Catherine for coming along, because my feeling is always, you know, with the Day 6 situation, that's where usually the youngsters end up, and I'm just interested actually in getting your views, Vanessa, because you must see young people coming in from different schools, and it must be apparent to you sometimes that different schools have got different thresholds or different criteria for exclusion. Now, I'm not asking you to name any schools, obviously you can't do that, but I'm just wondering whether you do observe that, and if you observe it, do you have any comments or feelings about that?
I have lots of feelings about it. I'll keep them to myself for the purpose of this meeting. Yeah, there are different thresholds, but I think we also have to, you know, use our professional judgment. As lots of people have said, you know, when a head teacher makes the decision to exclude, what is in their behaviour policy in that particular school may be different to a behaviour policy in a school down the road, and what the thresholds are there. We know that there are pastorally focused schools in Bedford. We know that there are more academically focused schools in Bedford. And so you will have different thresholds because of that focus. I think ultimately for me, it has to be around the conversation of, are we identifying need early enough? Are we getting in there early enough? Because, you know, a young person shouldn't be getting to year 11 and being excluded unless, you know, as Chris mentioned earlier on, yes, unfortunately, sometimes there are very serious one-off incidents that occur. I do think there's a think around for some of those and a way forward. But ultimately, if you have a young person who's been excluded for persistent disruption, and they've got as far as year 10 or the beginning of year 11, really that shouldn't be happening. That for me is a preventable exclusion. There could have, a lot of things could have been put in place to support that young person. I do see the need at times for exclusions. I'm not an anti-exclusion person at all. I do think that is a very valuable tool in the toolkit of a head teacher, and when it's absolutely necessary. But the wider system around the young person when they're excluded needs to be there as well, because what I've also found is with young people who have done a one-off serious incident, there tends to be a lot more going on in the background that we tend to find out when they do come to us at Grays. You know, our staff are very good at building those relationships and finding that information out from families. So there tends to be more than meets the eye of like an initial thing. But yes, ultimately, yeah, there are different thresholds. There are different reasons that head teachers make their decisions to exclude. But the big thing is making sure that as a collective, we're being very clear about the needs of young people and when they're being met and addressed.
I mean, another side to that is I know the rate of exclusions from primary is relatively low, and that's great. But I mean, something that I notice as a governor is that there are often problems which appear to be probably present at primary level, and that children present themselves and problems present themselves at secondary level, and you wish more could have been done actually earlier on. That clearly that there were problems. I mean, and as you're implying, these problems often stem from the family anyway. That more could be detected at a primary level. And again, I wonder whether you've got any thoughts about that.
I think our primary colleagues are fantastic at what they do, and ultimately, if you have a young person, you know, the majority of young people that walk through our door have social, emotional, and mental health needs. So when you're in a primary setting, you have that wraparound care, you have that one consistent person that is looking after you. You have that teacher at the front of the room that knows what makes you triggered, that knows what makes you annoyed, that knows what makes you happy. And so our primary colleagues do a fantastic job at managing those young people. The difference is when you get to secondary school, you know, you'll meet 15 to 16 different teaching adults in a week. On top of that, you'll have, you know, extra TAs in the classroom. You know, it's a very, no matter how small the secondary school is, it's a very busy place. And so those behaviours that were masked or managed really well in smaller primary settings tend to, for want of a better word, explode by the time that you get to secondary school. So yeah, I do think there's maybe elements of our primary colleagues getting ECNAFs and EHCP applications in sooner. I don't deny that. But I do think they do a fantastic job at managing and supporting our primary school age children. It's just about, you know, identifying those needs earlier and feeling confident that will be moved forward. Because if you're managing a young person really effectively in a primary school setting, there is an argument to say, well, why do they need an EHCP? They're doing very well in your school. So it's thinking about that double-edged sword as well, and how we support our primary colleagues in getting those EHCPs over the line if they're needed.
Thanks, Chris. Back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of, we're doing a lot of work at this moment across the whole of Bedford Borough about transitions, and I think in terms of just to just to push on the narrative around actually transitions is two ways. So it is, you know, the big conversation about actually, you know, if it is a case, and we're having this conversation with our secondary schools of saying, oh, you know, if only we'd known, or be interested, be inquisitive in terms of, that's the question about that, in terms of reach down, look at the information in terms of into our primary schools, in terms of many of our primary schools might have 8 or 9 different secondary schools that their children are going to, in terms of on those bullet points. And similarly, I think, so it is around actually, we need to strengthen that transition. It isn't good enough that actually, you know, if we've got a situation that in the second or third term of year 7 that needs suddenly become apparent, then there's, you know, they speak to the primary school and the primary school go, oh yeah, we could have told you about that. Like, we need to make sure that we're getting better at giving the information to it. And I just wanted to, it's not within the report, and this is a national data set as well as a local one, but I just want to, you know, us to sit uncomfortably with the data around this and say nationally, you know, in Bedford Borough, about 23% of all of our children in our schools are eligible for income-related free school meals. 23%, so just under 1 in every 4. So far this year, of all of our permanent exclusions, 65% of them have been eligible for income-related free school meals. And people aren't surprised by that data when I talk about it. But if we know that, you know, disproportionately children living in poverty and with, you know, the challenges that they are having, in terms of, that's when I talk about this isn't just a school-based issue. This is on all of us to sort of actually say what else contextually is happening for that child, what other support, what other, you know, barriers are that, you know, is that young person facing. But we should sit uncomfortably with that. And I said this, I had our education improvement governance group meeting where we talked about this and Alison presented around our inclusion. I did say, you know, in terms of it, that is hugely disproportionate. hugely disproportionate. And actually, but that's the national. If you look at the numbers of data, it's over 50% nationally in terms of that point. So we're again slightly higher this year on our rates. But we should be really thinking to ourselves again, when we talk about this, isn't just about identification of need. This isn't just about, in terms of what, some of this is about what's happening outside of the school classroom, what's happening for that young person, what is support around that family, what are the parental needs that need to be addressed, what is actually the family history of attending schools. How many of our children get permanently excluded had their parents themselves were permanently excluded from school, in terms of, or had a really negative result. This is why I talk about actually, I really hope, and I know our school colleagues will have, have me say this isn't just about saying, and the report shouldn't be just, rates of permanent exclusion in our schools, our schools are excluding too highly. It's actually, this is about us as a system really challenging ourselves to say, so what else do we need to do? Because that isn't good enough, if we honest, that disproportionality isn't good enough, and that's the challenge that we've said is, it shouldn't be that the rate of children being permanently excluded from the income related is 3 times the rate of the general population of children on that. So as I said, and there are other challenges for us around disproportionality or different things to have a look at, but that is the most stark for me, of regardless of gender, or regardless of race or ethnicity, or in terms of or religious beliefs, is the commonality here is children who are coming from from families where their income is such that they are eligible for income-related free school meals, is something that we need to be thinking about, and that isn't just that is a consistent, and that has been consistent, and that is a nationally consistent picture as well.
Well, thank you for that insight, Chris, and thank you very much for the presentation and your insights, Vanessa. So, anything else from the committee? If not, thank you very much indeed. You're very welcome to stay with us, Vanessa or Catherine, or if you want to duck out, I understand you're busy people. So if we can go on to the item 7, so that's commissioning placements and oversight of unregistered placements. So that's back to you, Jonathan, Dan, and Lucy.
I'm going to hand over to Lucy, and I will fill in if needed. But yeah, it's Lucy.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so there's a few projects in train at the minute. So of those, a couple of them certainly look at block provision. So that's trying to generate some sufficiency for our young people locally in Bedford. So the cross-regional project, which is a partnership of 6 local authorities, 5 of those neighbouring to us. It's an initiative that's led on by Oxfordshire County Council. It's nationally known as being a very successful block contract arrangement between local authorities and the providers. And in this scenario, Bedford will hopefully, subject to successful procurement, have access to 2 local beds and education from August of 2027. So that means we will have dedicated 2 beds for our young people, inclusive of education, that can be accessed from 2027. It's not uncommon for local authorities to do block provision, and that's why we are also looking across replicating something that we've got sort of sub-regionally with the cross-regional project to the home access project. Now that is a very similar model, but it will be looking at doing that across the eastern region of 11 local authorities. So both those provisions are ideally securing block provision. For each local authority, they will each have a number of beds that they are wanting to secure and have that for the life of the contract. So both those options, once live, will give Bedford the opportunity to have local residential children's home placements and hopefully with generating some buying power in doing so, because we're doing those either sub-regionally or regionally. The other project that we're working on at the moment is a commissioners are leading the process for us, but as 11 local authorities, and I realise I've said 10 in the report actually, that's because 10 local authorities in the Eastern region are all engaged with wanting to develop a framework that is regionally used for across the region for independent fostering agency provision and also children's home residential provision. That opportunity is being led on by commissioners, but as I say, 10 of the 11 local authorities are all heavily engaged in that. Huge rounds of market engagement, extensive discussions with the provider market over the last really 12 to 18 months have been happening. And we plan, so at the end of 2026, we plan to have the 2 local authorities that are going to lead those frameworks, 1 each, to have a procurement out to market come the end of this year, which will give Bedford the opportunity to call off of that framework alongside the other local authorities in the Eastern region for their residential and their IFA provision from April of 2027. There will likely be, in this Eastern region framework project, there will likely be the opportunity also to secure block provision. Now, the reason I just wanted to flag that is because at the moment, those terms are still being agreed, but what that means is, although we won't be creating block provision on a regional basis, it will allow each local authority that's calling off of that framework to, if they want to secure block provision throughout the life of that framework, which is likely to be 8 years. I think that covers everything from the placement side in terms of provision. But what I wanted to just touch on as well, which we put in the report, is with regards to uplifts, provider uplifts that are coming in on a regular basis for our children's placement. So as it was touched on earlier, trying to get some control around uplifts and spend in this area. At the moment, we didn't have anything in place that beyond emails coming through asking for uplift provision. We've generated in the last 12 months. So
sorry to jump in, Lucy. Uplifts, can you explain that?
So inflation uplift, so providers asking for inflationary uplifts on an annual basis. So that would be across residential, or actually all of our placement provision. And we've now introduced a new portal which will allow for providers to channel their uplift request through that portal so that they can be reviewed twice yearly at a panel. So that would be the April uplifts, which are typically for supported accommodation and residential and fostering provision. That when they want that to be effective from April, typically what providers have done in the past is write to us the month before or sometimes a couple of days before to say, these are the new fees we want you to consider from April. They are now channeled all through our portal, and we have a conversation twice yearly at panel to consider for those uplifts for April, and then for September for education placements to be considered in September for the new academic year. So that I guess that process now, having that aligned to an uplift panel that get to meet twice a year and have those conversations around requests of inflation for individual placements and new, so it would be both new and existing. It gives us the opportunity, where we've got commissioning arrangements already in place, to review the request, to review what's already in place. We might have something contractually in place that means we've got a commitment of how much uplift we're going to give to each provider, but also for the relevant panel members to consider the opportunity or the request that's been put in for us to then respond through that portal in one place. So that's quite a big shift in terms of moving from a previous process around how we managed uplifts through email to having now complete oversight of that through a portal, which is quite helpful. And then finally, I've just popped in here about what more recently, because of the increased demand for supervised contact or family time for young people with their families, we have introduced some sessional support teams. So alongside our in-house team that we've got, we will always reach out to them first to assist with family time. If we can't do that in-house, then we've created a new pool of sessional workers that we can access via our agency provider. And that means that we've got a pool of provision now where we have got workers that are able to assist us in sessional work or in contact in family time scenarios, and we can access them at a fixed rate. And the checks and balances of those people that are coming to assist in those settings have been reviewed and been pre-approved and vetted. So we've got now another solution to be able to access some of those workers, but to access them only when we can't use our in-house provision. I think that's it for me, Jonathan. If anyone's got any questions, or if you want to add to that.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I mean, I still can't. I mean, personally, I can't quite get a handle. Or maybe it's me being stupid. I can't. If you're working across the region, then you should be able to maximize our, as it were, buying power. So to get better quality at lower prices, and I don't quite directly see that from what you've said so far. But I mean, you're talking an awful lot about uplifts, but what about downlifts? If you see what I mean. I mean, if people are, you know, if we've got more buying power, then costs should be coming down, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, yeah, they will. It doesn't take away the right for providers to ask for inflationary uplifts, which is why we've got a mechanism to manage the uplifts when they come in. But of all the extensive engagement we've done with the market regionally, we had a dedicated workshop just around commercial sustainability and what that looks like. But you are absolutely right. Typically, having a block provision is a secure number of beds for a provider. That means they're going to be getting paid for those beds if we know we're going to fill them. So regionally, we absolutely think that is going to drive value for money because of the buying power that it will create.
Okay, so is it already getting better value for money, or is that an expectation?
So the frameworks aren't live yet. So for the cross-regional project is a procurement that is live now. So until we've got the outcome of that procurement, we are unable to see what that looks like. But we know from the success of those projects and similar projects are that by coming out regionally or sub-regionally, or even just as a group of authorities, the pricing that you will attract is far better than what it is on a spot basis or going it alone. So we know that's the case. But the framework, which of course isn't a block provision, it isn't guaranteeing a number of beds over that life of the contract, but it is allowing us as 11 local authorities to buy from there and generate our own additional block provision should we want. So the extensive market engagement that we've done over the last sort of 12, 18 months has really focused on co-production, which is, we know typically providers in the independent fostering agency space and also children residential homes, they have so much demand all the time that when we're asking them to join a framework, it typically isn't, you know, on the top of their radar to do that. So we've got to really balance carefully with the providers to say, we need you to be onboarded, get onboarded through our framework route, but we're going to do this co-produced with you. We need this to be a relational commissioning experience. What works, what doesn't work, and in that there's been a number of conversations that have come from that about how we can drive that into our service specification so it's a truly co-produced model that goes to market.
Okay. Hilda, over to you.
Yeah, the first question is, so for the regional frameworks, does that also mean that you have been kind of talking to the providers in our region? So will our children then most likely go to a residential home in the region or be with a foster carer in the region?
Yeah, so with the frameworks, we're not excluding local provisions. So there's lots of national providers and there's smaller local providers. That has been we've invited everybody to those sessions that we've had. Because we are going to, for the framework, there's a number of local authorities. We've had to stress throughout the market engagement sessions we've had with providers that we don't want to lose localised relationships. So we each have, as 11 authorities, we each are still going to need to place, but we want to try and generate sufficiency and provision in our own geographical area. So that's absolutely what we want to achieve. For block provision, so the cross-regional project specifically, that will be local homes for our children. So the provision will be set up for each local authority for a home in their area.
Okay. And then the second question is it's difficult because I do feel that there's such a power imbalance in the relationship. That's how I see it, between, because we know there's a shortage of children's homes, for example, and it feels like they can set their price, and as a local authority, it feels like we just have to kind of follow. So to what extent do we really have negotiating power? Or are we almost at the mercy of the market?
So we definitely are having these conversations with the providers. We've had some really good uptake of providers joining our events, and we've scheduled separate workshops to talk about different areas. And the commercial sustainability has been key. It links to what I mentioned earlier about the uplift panel, because providers will say we want uplifts, we want the opportunity to have an uplift, and if you don't give us that opportunity, then we will typically price higher because you're blocking us from being able to put in a request for uplift in line with inflation. So we've had been quite helpful conversations across both markets to really address that, and what does that mean, and how can we be more successful about that in the future. So that will all be taken into consideration when the procurement goes out.
To be honest, to me, that's not a very reassuring reply to Hilda's question, because it still sounds as if either they put the prices up or we agree to regular uplifts. So it's still the same thing, isn't it? That they've got us over a barrel, and there's not much we can do about it.
Well, I would say we've got really good. We've had really good engagement on this topic, which typically can be very, very difficult to have these, regular conversations with providers about the market and the challenges within it. But certainly we've tried to address that very sensitively in our conversations. And when we talk about relational commissioning with providers, we mean that, we want to work both ways. And that's got to, for us, it's got to be what's right for our young people, what's right for them in this scenario, and making sure that we've got that right relationship with the providers to help make sure our young people get the outcomes that they need.
Okay, Paul, you've got a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I have to say that I completely concur with Councillor Valentine and Councillor Hendricks on this. I mean, it does look like an interesting framework, but it's 9 months away now. What is happening now in terms of sufficiency?
So the sufficiency strategy is published. I don't know if you've seen the sufficiency strategy that's published for children's, which I can put in through the chat. We've already got existing relationships across both. So we've already got we're part of a pseudo DPS for residential placements, and we're part of a sub-regional arrangement for fostering agencies. So this will be a new provision that will be starting from April when the other two end.
Okay. And just a minor point, it says scrolling down the screen, the report says that we have successfully reduced the number of children in unregistered places, but it doesn't say how many. How many are currently in unregistered placements today?
It's 3.
It's 3. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's a tidy number, isn't it? Okay, thank you. That was it.
Chris, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to come in on the point of going, whilst I don't disagree with any of the points that have been made, Councillor Hendricks, Councillor Valentine, or Councillor Edmonds about, the situation, and providers having us over a barrel and those sort of phrases of it. The reason why it's is because obviously there's children at the heart of this, and in terms of, and it's around how do we, keep children safe and actually take those decisions to make sure those children are safe from harm. And in the worst cases of this, and phrases such as profiteering, of going, actually you have us over barrel, and that's the situation, that we have to pay this money, and then we can do it. But also, I just wanted to bring us back to, I think, a question, Councillor Mead, you had earlier around, do we know about local providers and do about local children? We should know about them because we should be using them. Like that's where we kind of want to get to. We don't want to have situations where we've got young people going off to Blackpool because that's the only bed that we can find. So back to the point of going, as Lucy said, we need to be engaging with our providers. We need to be building relationships with providers. We need people who are coming to set up a children's home in Bedford Borough, regardless of what people may think about children's homes or all those things. We want them to want to work with us and to be telling us and going, actually we do, because we want children to be staying close to their schools, to their families, where it's safe to do so. And so we need to engage with them. I think there's an interesting point, and I was at the ADCS conference last week, and Sir Martin Oliver from Ofsted talked about, there's an announcement last week where they said actually use of unregistered placements by a local authority is going to be a limiting factor, is what they're consulting on to say. So actually, if a local authority uses unregistered placement, then that leadership in that local authority cannot be graded anything more than requires improvement or what they're moving for. And the reason for that, and there was a big intake of breath from DCSs, lots of conversations about challenges going, we have that same challenge around doing it. They said, well, obviously there'll be context of individual, but the key question, back to your point, is going, do you have a local sufficiency plan? Is it being prioritised locally in terms of not just within children's services? This is, of course, actually the whole local authority saying, are you building more children's homes locally? Are you looking at what you're doing internally? Are you looking at actually what our options are? All the work that's happening in Gadsby Street and other areas, can we do more of that? That's what the ask is here in terms of actually how can we be more proactive in trying to disrupt the market ourselves by having our own. That's where we can be in a position where we can do it. But in amongst this, we've got people having to take very difficult decisions, often at a point where time is not of the essence to do to certain things on those particular points, and and that comes to, and we can talk about money. Of course, we've got to talk about money. We talk about the cost of those placements, but it's often the challenge we've got here is this is a child in the midst of this that we've got to find a placement. So it's multifaceted. It's kind of, it's got to be short term, but it's also got to be part of, back to the right questions around what's our sufficiency planning, what's our engagement in the market. But also the other question for us is going, do we also have plans as a local authority, not just the children's service, as a local authority, to create more, to staff more, to look at actually when we're building more developments, are we asking for more children's homes to be built that we can run ourselves? Those are the questions I think that are beyond just this committee and what things, but the right questions I think for the council to be asking ourselves as well. Because if we don't, and that's where you see, if you don't have enough foster carers, we've talked about this before, then you rely on independent foster carers. If you don't have enough of them, you're relying on residential. If you don't have enough of them, you're relying on and that's what happens. So the question is getting upstream and how can we create more of our own. As easy for me to say that, but that is us, for us to be thinking about, and that's the challenges we've got, whilst also the day-to-day of having to find beds for children and young people does not stop.
Great stuff. And back to you, Dan.
Yeah, I think I was just going to.
Yeah.
I think the market it's really important to understand the context of the national market here. So in 2016, the average price for children's home placed to a local authority was £3,100. In 2021, it was 4,800 odd, and in 2026, it's 7,000. This is a market that is very hot. You are looking at annualized growth in prices of about 9 to 10% a year at the moment. That has been different in different years. So if you don't, I would like my fuel bills to go backwards. They're not going to. So all you can do is be a savvy customer. And I think that's what the local authority needs to do. It needs to be a savvy customer. So you maybe, we all want to think in terms of savings, but you may need to think in terms of cost avoidance. So strategies like a structure around price rising in a market where, costs are increasing, local authorities, the supply and demand issue isn't in our favour right now. Having some structure around that is really important, because without it, they can just slap a price rise on you out of the blue. So I know I appreciate the concerns, but I think it is really important to think about the position within the market that we have. And if we don't do something, if we don't try these strategies, then the costs will increase at a faster rate.
I mean, I think Chris made a really good point. I mean, the good news is Bunyan Road and Gadsby Street, isn't it? The fact we're increasing our own provision, and surely that will give us a stronger position in the market. And I can see you're nodding to that one, Lucy. Well, I'm sure it makes sense. But could I just ask a final question, actually, about post-16 semi-independent placements? Because I think, is there not a separate framework for that? And again, there's scope for looking around, seeing who's good, seeing who we're really happy with those young people, as well as the cost factors.
Yeah, so
Can you just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, there is my understanding is there's an options appraisal that's being pulled together at the moment for that current provision, but we do have a DPS that's in place for lots. So we've got two sort of groups, I suppose, in supported accommodation. You've got those over 18 that have sort of more of a kind of floating support provision, and then your 16, 17-year-olds. The framework is, or the DPS, sorry, is lotted between those homes just in Bedford, and then lot 2 is any sort of surrounding areas. There are 19 providers that are currently on that DPS, and we have about 86% of provision goes through there from through our contracted providers through those 19. So there is a number of homes in the area, as we spoke about earlier, and typically they're all placed within Bedford where it's safe for them to do so. So that's quite a successful DPS. In terms of how it's currently working, but it is due at the moment. There's an options appraisal being considered. There has been some discussions amongst the region, in the eastern region, about potentially if there's option to explore to do that on a regional basis, which will form part of the options paper, which is going to be drafted. But it is important to note that that is very much at the moment working well for us from a local provision point of view, which is very successful and very good. But across all areas, including supported accommodation, children's homes, fostering provision, by doing that collaboratively with other local authorities, yes, there's a buying power conversation, which is driving value for money in the weekly fee, but there are also kind of the cost avoidance, similar to like Dan was saying earlier, that we are all working and to provide us the same way. We are all contract manage them in the same way. The KPIs we're using are the same. The service specification that is drafted, which has all our young people's voices in terms of what they want, is all being delivered. It's the same across the region. So I think that's a really important shift as well, which is from a provider perspective, what they're telling us is, this is really helpful for us. It's one tender to go through for the process of as local authorities Procurement Act. And also it means that we're meeting with you once. So from a streamlined point of view, by doing this regionally where we can, does have its strengths beyond just kind of value for money and a weekly fee. But the supported accommodation, because we have quite a lot of provision in Bedford already, and it is quite successful, we'll need to consider all of that, in the options appraisal about how that might sit on a regional footprint.
Yeah, I saw the service specification at one point. I was really impressed. I just thought it was so comprehensive, and obviously it was all, everybody was thinking about the safety of those young people, and I just thought it was, I thought it was really good, the way to go. Well, thanks for that. So any other questions or comments? Time's marching on a little bit. Well, thank you very much indeed, Lucy, for coming along and giving us your thoughts. Been so helpful. So if we could go on to notice forthcoming decisions. So we've got Children's Services customer feedback coming up executive on the 16th of September. And the work programme. So our next meeting is on the 21st of September, as I've already mentioned. So as well as the standing items on the improvement plan and KPIs, we have a report about the new sender arrangements. Chris already alluded to that, including the use of individual support plans. There's been a lot of talk about those in the press and so on. And also at that meeting, we're having a report from the Youth Offending Service. So is there anything else that occurs to people, committee members, would like to add? Hilda, over to you.
Yes, I think we mentioned at our pre-meet that we'd also like a report on the new workforce structure in children's services at the next meeting.
Yes, indeed. And I think by then, Jonathan, it will be reasonably bedded in, albeit not entirely, because we're talking about a fairly long, some months, aren't we, to do all the recruitment and so on.
Yes, but you would think most positions should be filled by then, or we should know who's on their way. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so that will be on the agenda. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to reference on the request for a report on the SEND reforms. Obviously, it specifically references individual support plans, but that isn't anything that is happening anytime soon. I think the nearest that would potentially be that would require legislative changes, and that's going to be talking about 2030. We've had to submit a SEND reform plan with the big focus on what the DfE are calling experts at hand, and also what we're doing around creating more specialist spaces. But obviously the Children's and Family Act 2014 stays as legislative piece of work. So any changes to EHCPs or anything along those lines, is still, the consultations don't just close. So we've submitted a reform plan, and I could talk about what we've submitted. I could even do a presentation if that would be helpful on what the plan is and what it entails. But I don't know if we want to just possibly just tweak the wording or expectations around, I can make reference to the DfE have stated this in their white paper, but there's no local implementation, if that makes sense. What we have been asked, and we have been asked to specifically look at our experts at hand. We've received a dedicated grant to deliver experts at hand locally next academic year, and to scale that up and to look at special spaces. So in terms of just conscious of, there's a lot of uncertainty and concern within the SEND system anyway around things like individual support plans and what those changes are. I could do a report on speculation around what there could be and couldn't be, but I'm also conscious of the consultation for those just changed. But I'd probably rather do a report on actually what we have submitted as a local area, what our plan is working with our parent care reform and our health partners on delivering our experts and how it fits in with some of the things that we've talked about. And we can do, if that's okay, Chair. I just don't want.
I'm sure that would make sense. It's just that because you've been asked to do that, haven't you? You've been asked to. I mean, this is why it's quite an unusual thing to have it's like a sort of 10-year program, isn't it? So, and yet you and people in your position have been asked to put these reports in, and so yeah, it's just based on really what you've done already.
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously there's intense interest from the Parent Care Forum and others, even though it is such a long-term thing. So it's again how you've been engaging with them and so on. To answer various questions, but by all means tweak the report in the way it's presented as you think appropriate, Chris. That it's absolutely.
And if it's possible to, as I said, I think because a lot of it is going to be kind of quite visual or different on those lines. If I can present, I don't know, looking at Ellie, but if there's a way of me presenting in a way, I think that it might just be helpful. It's something that we've done to schools in various different forms, to parent carers and to different areas, but just to visually see what that's going to look like, why we're doing it along those lines. I'll write the report as well, but I think it's just I'm happy to do both, as I've got multiple slide decks already lined up already from various different times where I've presented this.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's it. So thank you all very much indeed. It's been really interesting and helpful, and thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and see you at the next meeting. Okay.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. All the best. Yeah. Bye. Bye.